Odawa, Indy. And we are here to discuss our Healing to Wellness court and how we have included peer recovery to better support connection to our community. And I am our project director, Alyssa Harold. I'm also the probation officer for the program. And then we have Matt Lesky with us.
Hi, I'm Matt Lesky. I'm the court administrator for the Little Triers Bands of Odawa Indians Tribal Court. I was also previously the tribe's prosecutor and a defense attorney, and in both of those roles, I served on our drug court team.
Hi, I'm Kevin Gasco. I'm the male cultural resource advisor with our tribal court. Previously, I had been a probation officer with court and served on the Healing to Wellness team. And in between that, then and now, I was a volunteer for quite a while. So, and I've been in long-term recovery. My own personal recovery started in 1983, and I enjoy this work. It's kind of how I live my life anyway.
So today we are going to talk about how our Healing to Wellness program was established, and the foundation of our program is our cultural values and how we incorporate that into programming. The overview of the different roles of our cultural advisors, peer recovery coaches, and a peer graduate on the team. We've had a period of time when we were without a peer graduate, and that has a negative impact on both the participants and the team as a whole. And we would really encourage teams that are able to add that into your programming. Also, how we have benefited just as a whole in the past from choosing volunteers such as Kevin, who brought a great deal of personal knowledge to our program, and how we've made some mistakes along the way with individuals we've added to our team. Advisors should be working with your clients to support their recovery, and there's different roles for all of those positions and different ways to incorporate them. I don't think you can ever have too many peer recovery supports. So the overall goal of our program is to provide the participants with connection to their greater community, and that's been the focus of our enhancement period for the last 2 years. And overall to utilize our cultural resource advisors to establish those programming elements into our Healing to Wellness court.
The name of our program, Waabshki, Miigwan, in our Anishinaabe language means white feather. Before our court started, Rita Gasco Shepherd was an appellate justice of the tribal court, and my cousin. She was on a training to Cake, Alaska, and wanted to find her first eagle feather. They had been told that it was a good time of the year to look for eagle feathers, and she was eager to find one. Unsuccessful until seeing a feather lying in the mud at a dump, which was the last stop on a guided tour of the island. Just Gasco Shepherd saw a quill sticking out of the mud at her feet. She pulled on the quill, and it was the sorriest feather she could imagine. Despite others with her saying that help her find a better feather, she wanted to take that one. She took the feather back to her hotel room, cleaned it up with soap and water, fanned it to dry it, and had a beautiful white eagle tail feather. Truly a gift from the Creator. The story is retold by her grandson, Joe Lucier, one of the team that wrote the original handbook for our program, provided the founding vision for our Healing to Wellness court, Waabshki Miigwan. As stated by Judge Gasco Shepherd, all of our citizens are worthy of redemption. And Judge Gasco Shepherd went on to say later, just as I pulled the dirty and mangled feather from the muck and then transformed it into a beautiful, clean feather, it is with much prayer that I hope each one of our young people who are struggling can also be pulled from their troubled past to find strength in the Creator to make their own transformation.
So as I said before, I've been involved in the program since its inception We began operation in 2010 with a planning period in 2009. And over that 12 years, our program has seen a lot of evolution. I know that Alyssa and Kevin are going to talk about some of those facets that have changed over time. So our program, one key framework that's important is that we have an interwoven approach to justice. And what that means is that in our hearings and in our team meetings, we sit together in a circle. We do that to reflect the equality that we believe exists between humans, to promote the concept of respect. So respect between team members and respect between team members and participants. And that by doing things in this way, by holding our hearings in this way and our team meetings in this way, we've reduced the adversarial nature that can sometimes arise in those hearings. You know, as you all know, doing this work, you talk about some very sensitive things, you talk about some very difficult things. And doing this approach helps us to minimize the feel that it is me accusing you or you having to respond to those sorts of things. Even our judge, when our chief judge, when we originally designed the new courtroom, wanted her bench on the same level as every other witness booth and the counsel tables, to reflect that while she might be a judge, she is a human being on the same level as the rest of us. And so that's a key part of how we approach our clients in the program. So when our program initially started, it was 44 weeks long. We have since expanded that over time to be an 18-month program with 5 phases. So the first 4 phases are what I would call our heavily programmatic phases. And the last phase deals with the clients gaining a certain level of independence and control over their recovery apart from participating in the court program. So our phases are also divided along the 7 grandfather teachings. So phase 1, for instance, is about honesty. It lasts approximately 10 weeks. And the reason we start there is that the individuals who find themselves in our program typically have struggled with being dishonest, first to themselves and then to their family and to their community. And that is how they maintain their addiction. So we recognize that. And we recognize that it is during this time where we have to work with them to develop that character. That is not something they come to us with. So the second phase would be an accepting phase, which is we talk about humility and respect. So being humble enough to acknowledge that you have a problem and that it is that problem that's brought you to court, and have enough respect for yourself and for the rest of the people around you to acknowledge that as well. So that phase lasts approximately 12 weeks. Phase 3 is what we call the willing phase, and that those teachings that are associated with that are bravery and love. And again, that idea is that at that point in time, we are getting our folks to a place where they are moving past a pre-contemplative phase of change and moving into making actual change and commitment to change. And that takes a lot of courage, because as they move through the program, we are asking them to change an awful lot about their life, how they have coped with their issues, how they've coped with their trauma, and to replace those things with coping skills that are more healthy, also while not numbing themselves. And that can be very, very difficult for folks. Phase 4 is what we call the succeeding phase. So this is sort of like, at this point in time, they're sort of working on wisdom and truth. Those are the grandfather teachings that are associated with that phase. And at that point, we're talking about them living their truth, being authentically who they are without the veneer of their use, and having hopefully gained some wisdom through the program on how to cope and deal with their addiction on a long-term basis and to live in recovery. And then phase 5, which we call the giving phase, is where they have sort of moved past having a really strong tether in the form of the court. There's still court obligations, but they're really focusing at that point on developing and sustaining their own recovery outside of the mainline program. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. And I think, I don't know, Alyssa, if you want to add anything right at that point.
To go into how we structure our programming, this is an overview of what our different phases are based on. And originally our manuals did not go over the calendar season. And through our cultural advisors, we have reshaped our programming. And I think it's really important to look at this image, and especially for clients who may not have been exposed to these teachings when they were younger, or through their addiction have gotten away from living this way, and being able to go through these different stages with them. I know all the clients, when they come in, get upset with me because I think of them as my kids, and I tell them that, because when they come into the program and they are just so new and they're so angry and they're so raw to experiencing all those feelings without using that, they are very childlike in a way, because you have to learn a whole new way to live. Then clients think they're really sneaky at sometimes, and they might be getting away with something. It's like if you catch your 5-year-old with the cookie bag and you say, "Did you take the cookies?" And they say no. That's how I feel sometimes with the probation clients in the beginning. And then you see them grow, and that's how our phases are structured, and using service projects to have them connect with our community. So they're doing traditional activities and getting involved in ways their role should be, has been so transformative in their recovery. I just can't thank Kevin enough for those additions to our program.
Yeah, I think that that's something that, just going back to when the program was when we initially started operation, we had some cultural elements, like we had face fires, which Kevin will talk about a little bit later. Those have been present since the beginning. But a lot of the focus on these, incorporating this sort of seasonal change in activity and having that be reflective too of their own recovery journey, has really been like with the advent of our cultural resource advisors, and those came on after one of our first enhancement grants. So, and I would just say, like, what this looks like for us may not look the same for you where you're at. And so I know, like, we talked about this today because we have like things like doing, maple sugar is one of our activities that Kevin will talk about. And I suppose, I don't know if there's Chris there. That's not going to really apply to where she's at, because they don't have maple trees and that's not part of their seasonal activities. And so I think it's important to remember too, that what we incorporate in our program for cultural activities is going to look different for all of you, and how you envision that adding to your program and helping your clients form connections is going to be slightly different than us.
So, and to go into the roles on the team, we have our chief judge, our associate judge, court administrator, probably solving court coordinator. I have a very long title. Senior court clerk, female advisor, male advisor, law enforcement, our therapist team. We have both a male and female because we represent the balance with our advisors and through therapy, our prosecutor, defense attorney, and our peer graduate. And so I'm just going to go through a few that aren't always key team members, but that we feel make our programming very special and more successful, specifically starting with our chief judge. We're very fortunate to have Chief Judge Allie Greenleaf Maldonado. She is currently on the board of directors for the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. She previously served on our Michigan Association of Treatment Court Professionals. And with that experience, she has been able to form connections with our state partners where we live. Our jurisdiction is dispersed throughout a 3-county land with different trust properties. So this has limited our original ability to handle cases. And with that, we have fostered a relationship with our state partners to have cases that originated on state land to be handled within our tribal court program. And then we supervise their probationary period through our Healing to Wellness program. And that is not something we could do without forming a connection with our local agencies. And this has allowed for tribal citizens to receive culturally appropriate services rather than serve lengthy incarceration periods. I can think of the first case I went to. I was in a local state court, and the prosecutor was advocating for this individual to go to prison for 6 years, and the Michigan Department of Corrections was in support, and they had a maximum sentence guidelines. And the statement was, they've already been given enough chances. They've had enough. They need to go to prison. There's nothing left we can offer them, which is obviously the opposite of our foundational story and what we believe at the tribe. And the response to that is they have not been offered culturally appropriate services ever. I've never had a client in the state system who's facing a felony charge that has gone through cultural services who has a current connection with their tribe. At one point they might have, but while they're engaging in those active addiction and committing crimes, they are not with their tribe. So that is something that was receptive from the local judges, and we started receiving those clients. In the year of 2021, our treatment team had 10 participants. Had they all served their maximum jail sentences, that would have been a collective 38 years of tribal citizens away from their families, creating more trauma for their children, not learning how to live in a home, not learning how to connect with their community. And so we offer a chance at rehabilitation and appropriate services, which is the focus of our presentation today, is engaging with those cultural advisors and peer coaches. Another distinction that I think is worth noting for programs that are making changes, we have myself serve as both our coordinator and probation officer. There are advantages and disadvantages to this approach. The longer you're at the tribe, I think the more jobs you get. And I've been here a while, so I have a few hats at this point, but I form a very close relationship with our clients. They contact me when they struggle, all the coordinators on the call. I know you're getting calls at 11 at night and 5 in the morning, and when people are having problems, and that's our role to help guide them. As a probation officer, you show you care through accountability, and those are two different roles. And I know that is difficult for the clients who called me with a significant trauma the day before, but then have a probationary violation the next day to receive that sanctioned response from me. If we were able to, we would divvy up those jobs. I would want to stay as the coordinator. I like that role better. But there is a conflict, and with that conflict is the same as our defense attorney who is in long-term recovery over 20 years. He brings a significant amount of experience and knowledge. He's amazing with our clients. We're so fortunate to have him. But there is a line that when clients are engaging in negative behaviors for him, that really is difficult for what's best for them and what his road is in recovery versus his ethical obligation as an attorney to represent them and their wishes, which may be contrary to their best interests. So those are just ethical considerations to keep in mind with your roles on your team. And that's how we are composed. And the most important roles are going to be our cultural advisors and our treatment team, as well as our peer graduate. So having a male and female advisor on the team is something we're able to do with BGA funding. That has improved our programming significantly, and Kevin's going to speak more on those different roles.
Yeah, having a male and a female cultural resource advisors promotes balance. Just as our Anishinaabe teachings, based on our creation story, stress equality of male and female and balance. but we do have separate responsibilities. I'll go into that a little bit more later. The traditional teachings reference our creation story, and our values that we're trying to instill and teach to our participants are based on that. And the 7 grandfather teachings, which we alluded to earlier, are love, humility, wisdom, truth, respect, bravery, and honesty. We have sacred fires for each phase that was talked about a little bit. In phase 1, it's a sunrise fire. So we light it at sunrise and it goes for 4 hours. Phase 2 is a noon fire. We light it at noon and it goes for 4 hours. Phase 3 is a sunset fire. We light it 4 hours before sunset and allow it to go out at sunset. And in phase 4, it's an all-day fire. We light it at sunrise and it goes until sunset. Because of COVID, we've not been able to offer sweat lodge ceremonies for our participants, but as we hopefully move towards a post-COVID life, we can include that. We are going to have a new traditional use area on our main campus for the tribe, and build a new lodge there, and to kind of consolidate efforts that were going by different departments. We're trying to consolidate it to one location. We offer weekly talking circles while the staffing is going on. One of our, either myself or the female cultural resource advisor, and sometimes a volunteer, will have a talking circle while the team is staffing. And in that talking circle, we'll smudge, we'll pass an eagle feather, and it's a check-in on how their week is going. And after everybody it's gone around once, we have a reading, generally like a white bison elders reading, to provide a focus for reflection. And occasionally we do work on projects. If there's a graduation coming up and they're making a gift for a graduate, they might finish up those projects during that time. When they talked about basing our cultural services on a year-long calendar, we've been working with some of our practitioners in our community about when certain things that they need to harvest or they need to process, it's based on when that is available. So in the picture, those are bulrushes that were harvested from a local lake, and they need to be boiled and then dried and then boiled a second time and dried so that they can be stored until they're ready to use them. So our people have been also working in the bush. For those that don't have bush, that's what we call the woods. And they've been doing things like pulling bark, basswood and cedar that's used in certain kinds of weaving, harvesting the bulrushes and processing those. They've also been involved in picking sweetgrass and maybe sage and cedar. They've been working with one of our local artisans. She's a fiber artist. Her name is Wasan. She's fairly well famous. She's a grandmother and a language learner as well. So she's able to connect them both in terms of their hands on the materials and the language that goes behind it and the certain nuances of culture that are involved in that. We have taken some things from Waabshki, although that's mostly a treatment perspective now. But we do the talking circles. We're familiar with the 12-step version that's found in Waabshki, and mind mapping is a really useful tool, and it really helps. It helps our people to understand those concepts. The cultural advisors, we help with transportation needs. If some of our participants don't have a license or a car, we'll pick them up and bring them to court. We've transported them to drug testing and other community activities. Denise, the female cultural resource advisor, is a very talented bead worker and artist. She's very good at sewing and other crafts. So we kind of work as a team where she does a lot of that kind of hands-on thing. with our participants. Our tribe also offers language classes through our language department. The name of the language department is Gijigoy Language Department. Just a little Indian bragging, that's my mother's family name. My cousin was really a proponent of revitalizing language, and that's in his honor. That's where that name came from. I think that's about it in terms of the cultural things that we've added.
And something to note for language, because we recognize how important that is to our sovereignty, that we count that towards any employment requirement. And the judge has actually doubled those hours. So if you go to language class for 2 hours, you get credit for 4, and what we call our 30-hour vocational requirement. So really making it an option for people who want to do a more traditional path for their requirements, that we are giving them credit for doing those.
This is a picture of our Firekeepers Lodge, is what they named it. It's out the east door of our main administration building on our government campus. You can see it a little bit, and the benches are different colors, and those are based on the medicine wheel and our understanding of what each of those directions, the color that's involved with them. I had talked a little bit about primary responsibilities, and so when we do these fires, for us men, our responsibility is to tend the fire and take care of fire. The women in our community, their responsibility is to care for the water. And so when I have a male participant, I'll help him learn how to strike his own fire and tend it. And for our females, I'm basically the fire tender for them as they go through that reflection during those times. The other thing about the fires that's really, I think, beneficial for our participants, and I as an individual in recovery also get a lot out of it, is we have a lot of discussions during that time, because it's basically, we might have some people stopping by, but it's basically the cultural resource advisors and the participant there for the most part. And there's a lot of discussions about recovery. There's a lot of questions about culture, and I refer to some of our participants that come, and it's not meant in a derogatory way. It's kind of an explanation of where they're at. Is they're like cultural orphans in a sense, because many times the older ones in their families either didn't participate in the culture or they passed on already. So we're basically trying to explain to them in our Anishinaabe cultural life that life is a path, and we're trying to put you on that path and equip you with the things you will need first as you start your journey.
And I think the fires also, if you have something built into your program where you are able to engage with their family members and see who they invite to events and ceremonies, is a really good indicator of where they're at. Someone who expresses gratitude or offers tobacco to the advisors for their assistance is someone who's reestablishing those values into their day-to-day life. Someone who may come to the fire and is complaining or on their cell phone and doesn't want to participate in teachings, that's when we would want to get them engaged more with the peer recovery coach. And we're going to look at what can we do to help them. And so adding in those cultural activities and ceremonies, so you engage with them outside of your courtroom and outside of treatment and see who their friends are, who their sponsor is really a helpful portion and has improved our programming tremendously.
So one of the things that has been more recently added to the, I guess, the spectrum of services that we can offer our clients is a peer recovery coach. So our behavioral health department at the tribe recently hired a peer recovery coach, and that individual has begun working with our clients. And so we're going to do a Q&A period, and I don't know how many of you might have a peer recovery coach in your program or available to you, but they are different from a sponsor or a therapist. So a peer recovery coach really is helping participants establish life goals, identify barriers to those things, and develop a plan to overcome those barriers in a non-clinical sense. So this is an individual who is offering a type of service that isn't a treatment-based service, and it's not a sponsorship-based service. So, sponsors for us principally work with our clients as they go through their step work, through their 12 steps. They serve as a support when they are dealing with cravings, or they are struggling with wanting to use. In the same vein, a therapist is really working on what are the underlying causes of why you're using, what are your behavioral defects that we can work on. And that's not really what the role of a peer recovery coach is. We utilize PRCs in our program to assist with client transport, to help them establish what sort of goals they want to have outside of the program. That could be anything. It could be, do I want to buy a house? Do I want to get a different job? So sort of the things that people who are not struggling with addiction might want to do. What the peer recovery coach does is help them do that in that framework of I am a recovering addict. And how do I navigate that on top of everything else that I might have to do relative to my program, relative to court requirements that I have, or just relative to the fact that I'm dealing with this addiction that I'm trying to figure out how to manage in a healthy way. So those sorts of things, offering rides, planning, figuring out how to coordinate on the ground services to achieve those things. Those are the sorts of things that the peer recovery coach should be engaging with. We are very lucky that our peer recovery coach is an individual who himself went through a state court OWI program, treatment court program, and has some long-term sustained sobriety. He is very open about it, about his recovery journey, which is a really positive thing and allows him to really connect with our clients. But what he doesn't do is provide them those treatment services or those sponsorship services that other individuals are more suited to do. And there is like a real, I would say our behavioral health makes sure to try to really keep a separation between what he's providing to the clients versus what they as therapists are providing to the clients.
I think
Yeah.
that boundary is a really important element. A peer coach is not fixing problems. They're not conducting the therapy or being there for them just to vent to. It's someone who is supporting their advocacy of their own life. And if you are struggling because you don't have a license based on your addiction, how do we work together to get your license back? And those are really helpful tools when a client is not connecting with us as team members. And there are times when, because both cultural advisors sit on the team, an outside perspective is helpful. And typically Kevin will be at those meetings with our peer recovery coach, but an individual who's reluctant to get a sponsor, we might have them work with the peer recovery coach until they do so to set some goals. Or someone who is not making their peer recovery meetings, well, why don't you work with this other individual and make a plan? Because if we are the ones problem solving for them, we're not helping them rewire their brain to making healthy choices. It's not about us giving them the roadmap of how to fix their life, because if they don't learn the skills to overcome adversity, they're not going to be successful in a lot of ways after they leave the program. And one of the harder things for individuals coming out of a program as a graduate is not having that big support net behind them. And while we say we are here and we are happy to have you back, most clients aren't visiting on a weekly basis.
Very
So
true. Very
some,
true.
some come in, but overwhelmingly, they move on with their life, and we are a chapter, and we hope we help them set up that foundation for their lives. But that is why having this additional support service is so helpful to participants, especially the ones who are not succeeding as quickly as your programming materials would like them to.
I think that outside the court piece is important too. Like that separation really does make a difference in how they will engage with them.
In terms of peer graduates, having one of our people that have successfully graduated and has the right skill set, I would say, to be in that position. It reminded me of the Miigwan Lodge is a healing lodge within the larger Anishinaabe Lodge. And when you have gone to ceremonies and you want to live that life and do the work that those Miigwan peoples are doing, you offer tobacco, and we call it sema, to the lodge. And one by one, you say out your spirit name and your clan, and you stand in front of the grandmothers of the lodge, all the chiefs of the lodge, and all the rest of the leadership, and you tell them why you want to become a Miigwan or why you want to do that work. And after you've offered that sema, you're sitting in a certain place in the lodge, and you're looking across the lodge at where the chiefs sit. And our grand chief, who has since walked on, I remember him when I was sitting there, and I was sitting there with two of my kids and the rest of the initiates. And he got up and he addressed us and he said, "I once sat where you're sitting." He says, "There is no instant way or shortcut to living the Miigwan life. I had the feeling like closeness to the spirit for me as a person was attainable. It instilled a sense of inclusion, identity, and belonging, which is what a good peer graduate can help current participants feel. Peer graduate can state, I've sat where you're sitting, been through the program and all the challenges, feelings, and time commitments that you're experiencing, and I'm proof that it can be done. Without a graduate peer, this perspective of being one of them, quote unquote, is lost. The peer graduate can help overcome obstacles, cultivate connection, and be a part of a legacy of recovery in our community. In a way of looking at it is they're part of a continual chain of recovery and can be role models for our youth.
And with that, of things we lost during this period of time where we did not have a peer graduate on the team, because that was a long-standing team role, and due to budgetary restrictions, we were unable to have that role filled for about 3 years, unfortunately, and it really impacted both participants, but us as a team. It really helps frame how you talk about clients, having someone who has walked that road before you. It gives us the perspective of when we're doing something off-based or that isn't helpful. As we have gotten told by many clients, petty requirements, and they are able to articulate why it didn't help them. And an individual who is able to come into the team and advocate for their peers within that role is really valuable. Now, with that, though, you have to acknowledge that they are sitting on the team, and that is very different than a peer recovery coach who should not be sitting on your team. That is an outside entity, such as a sponsor would not sit on your team. That's there to help them strategize for their life. The way which we use a peer graduate has also that association of being a team member, and they are there to help us frame our programming, look over materials, say if something is beneficial or if it's, maybe the reading level is too difficult, or they said this assignment did not help at all and was busy work, which is not something we are trying to put into our programming. But that perspective is different than someone sitting outside with the clients prior to court. So being mindful of how you integrate your peer graduate. There are again pros and cons for us. It is very helpful to have that perspective on the team, as is another individual with long-term recovery, but how they got there is a different path and one that brings different opinions, frames of our conversations, and has benefited us a lot. When we say we learn from our clients, we truly mean that. Most of our programmatic shifts are not as much data driven, but rather conversations from clients on things they liked and things they didn't think helped them.
So I think that in that same vein, not every individual that graduates from your program is going to be an appropriate fit to be a peer graduate on the team. And that is something that we have, I would say, had to learn through experience on our team. And based on, and again, like Alyssa was saying, we learn from our clients, and that's not just about programmatic stuff, but also about like who would make a good fit to be on the team. And, you know, we had a probate court judge that used to have this term. He would say, you can be technically compliant, but not benefiting from the service. And you can have graduates that are in that vein. And what you want to look for is someone who you can see is actually embracing a recovery lifestyle and who is going to be a positive impact on your team and can be a positive impact with your clients when they interact with them. And I think one of the things that I know Alyssa and I have talked about, and I think even some other team members, is what the expectations for that individual really should be, and having those be clearly set out. And I know, Alyssa, if you want to talk about like that idea of having a job description or something for that individual.
Yes, we previously did not have roles or responsibilities, and like anyone else on your team, to be successful, they should know what their lane is. When you don't set that out, it is very hard for them to fulfill what you're looking for. Also, we were allowing individuals post-graduation to come sit on the team without a set period of recovery post-graduation. So what that looked like for some of the past peer graduates was utilizing the team staffing as their own recovery meeting almost. And they would say to us, like, this is what's keeping me sober.
Yeah.
So that is not what we're looking for as an individual working with the other clients. Our goal is to foster those outside connections and for them to find that lifestyle within themselves, that they are not waiting to drink, but that they wouldn't drink for anything else in the world because their life is so much better. And having an individual who continues to go to meetings, who has expectations outside of whether they're with us or not, that they are going to do these continuous AA meetings, giving back, working on their 12th step is really valuable. Because you can have someone come in who has their own bias against clients. You know, I did it, so why can't everyone else? And that's why having a robust team is really helpful to remind people, just because you were able to do that doesn't mean that everyone is there yet. And we talk a lot about proximal and distal goals, and some clients have less trauma. Some clients have family support. Some clients were instilled a hard work ethic, and that actually is something that is really hard to reestablish later in life. So having someone mindful of those differences in people and willing to work with them is what we were looking for, and why we chose this individual, which our next slide is actually taken with their permission from their graduation ceremony PowerPoint. Took one of their pages.
So part of our program is that graduates, when they, at their graduation ceremony, have to give a presentation, at least to the team. And not everybody utilizes a PowerPoint, but a lot of them do, because it helps give them a point to talk from, and it's a framework for them. Most of them are not typically very good public speakers or haven't done much of it in their experience. So this individual, who is a recent graduate, the thing that we saw in him, that we said, yes, this is a person we want to have as our peer graduate, is one, he has established an independent basis for recovery. So he has a plan for how he's going to sustain his recovery that has nothing to do with our program. So he actively chairs peer recovery support meetings. He works with people. He is organizing sober events. Like, his big thing for him was board game nights and fight nights. We laugh about it, but like for him, that was like a really, really big thing. He, I would say, consumes recovery books. Like, he reads a great deal about recovery principles from lots of different folks. He can talk about the benefits of being in recovery. This is like a very big thing that I think that when you're looking at, if you're going to incorporate a peer graduate onto your team, having someone that can talk honestly and sincerely about how recovery has positively impacted their life and what changes they have seen in their own life that have been brought about from getting into recovery is really, really important. Because you will have some people who graduate, and unfortunately, they may not, like, we may want that for them. We may want them to see that benefit, and they might not be in a place yet where they can. And that person, even though they've graduated your program, is probably not an appropriate fit to be on your team at that point in time. And, he's able to talk about the areas of his life that have improved, like the way his work life has improved, the way his home life with his kids have improved. His goals that, like, I think for most people who do not have an addiction problem are sort of average goals, like having a home, taking a vacation, just doing fun stuff with his kids, that he was not. He was looking at going to prison. He had been in and out of prison due to alcohol and drug use and had previous CPS cases. His life, his addiction really seriously had negatively impacted his life consistently throughout his adulthood. And he talks about, like, being able to even think about these things and talk about them in an honest and sincere way, has how it's benefited him, how he can see that and how he can live that. And that is the kind of person that you want, because he also has a very honest take about recovery in the program. And he's very willing to say, like, well, I didn't really like this, and I didn't care if this didn't do much for me. This assignment wasn't that helpful. And these are the things, though, that really work.
And for him also, he had a interesting COVID story where he was released on work release and just had no supervision through the Michigan Department of Corrections, which was an oopsie. So he had about 4 months where he did not drink, but he was not engaged in recovery services. And the change of the anger he had when he came in, he was so anxious. We had meetings with him in my office where I would say, if you miss a call, there might be a response. And he would send text messages to his defense attorney, just like so worried if something was outside of his control. And he could not get past step 1. And his work with the sponsor so tremendously changed who he was at that time and the person he was meant to be. And just the peace he found. We were at a sentencing hearing in state court, and I went with him to advocate for his state charges to be reduced so he wouldn't have any incarceration time. And there were technicalities in the hearing at that time, didn't go the way we wanted. Ultimately, we were successful, and he had a 5-year probationary sentence closed early, which is the first time that's ever happened. But here I am, and I'm just furious. I am so angry that it didn't go the way I thought it should for all the work this individual put in. And he was like, I did it, and it is just enough to know you and the team are all behind me. And I'm so grateful for that. I was like, that is so much healthier than me right now. That is, but that's who he is. And
Yeah.
he's done the work. And so for us as team members, I learn from him every time I talk to him.
Yeah, look, talk a little bit about multiple pathways. When I went through CCAR training, I got sober back in the 80s originally, and back then there were not really multiple pathways. There was kind of like one pathway, and you either kind of got it or you didn't. But that experience going through that training really opened my mind up, and there's different personalities, there's different way that people were raised, so they respond differently to a different pathway. There's smart recovery, there's Dharma recovery meetings in our area. There's Wellbriety has helped a lot of people. NA, there's a lot of different pathways, and that's similar to having I think a multi dimensional team, in that there's different ways to connect with people, and certain of those individuals, they might not connect with everybody, but there might be somebody on the team that they do connect with. We're fortunate in that we have 3 members of our treatment team that have long-term sobriety. And so there's a lot of collective experience there that really helps some of our folks. Like I say a little bit about sponsorship as well. Sponsorship is one of those touchy subjects, in that it's a requirement, but we really don't want to get involved in their relationship with their sponsor. So, it's like what Matt was saying about what the judge said. You can be technically correct, but not necessarily successful. And I think that's what some of our folks do. They just go out and find somebody, a body that they can say, yeah, I'm your sponsor. And so they meet that requirement. But if they continue to really work on their recovery, a lot of them will look for another sponsor, because they realize the benefits that can be obtained through a good relationship with a sponsor. Back when I first got sober, sponsors were the lifeblood of early recovery. They taught you how to live. They taught you, they were your constant reminder that sobriety and making those choices are really an everyday thing. And I know a couple of our people that their second sponsor was really beneficial in helping them as they move along in their recovery.
I mean, I think just, one of the things too about that is that from our experience, you can kind of, whether or not you are engaged with your sponsor is kind of a bellwether in terms of how well you're going to do in the program. When you have individuals who will not get a sponsor, or who are really struggling with that, the chances are really high they're also struggling in almost every other area of your program. Because that is, I guess from my perspective, just watching this over the years, is like sponsorship requires you to make a connection with someone and be honest and somewhat vulnerable with them, to talk about the kinds of things you need to in order to address like the steps and the step work, and just talk, honestly about your addiction. And when people actually get a sponsor who is engaged and involved, you can almost immediately tell the difference in that's happened for them, just in how they engage in the program a lot of times.
And I would agree with that completely. Something we added to our programming were phase up applications, because the technical compliance piece, we really had individuals who, while they were meeting some of the benchmarks, we knew they were not internalizing the behaviors that would reduce their recidivism or risk levels. So we created these applications that their sponsor needs to sign off on. And, funny enough, some of the people struggling got a brand new sponsor the day before the application was due. So then they had to spend more time working with that. And while those applications are new, we're also going to have them start presenting those applications to the team, we want to continue to give them opportunities to utilize skills, improve upon their agency building for themselves so that they can advocate in their jobs and their home lives and relationships, especially for our female clients who 100% have been victims of sexual and domestic violence. We want to help empower them. Our cultural advisors, having them do community activities too, has given such strength to our women of learning what skills they have inside of them. But in addition to improvement, we could actively connect people a little bit sooner to resources. I think sometimes on teams we're more reactive and we wait until sanctions happen. I would like to see us promoting these resources prior to that to try to at least, and while we can't own their accomplishments or their mistakes, we are there to help frame the path. And I think that's something that we can always be reflective on as providers. We're asking people to transform their lives, and being reflective of what you're doing in your own programming is a pretty small price for what we're asking them to do, which is change everything.
Just everything.
Just all of it.
In closing, this picture of a fire in our Anishinaabe culture, that represents our connection to the spirit world, because we lay our medicines and our sema in that fire, and that smoke takes our prayers and our thoughts up to the spirit realm, to the creator. There's a saying that's going around recovery. I've heard it, and it's going around Facebook too. I don't know if you're familiar with Facebook. I've also saw it there. But our life experience, which reflects aspects of our creation story, and that we aren't so much as human beings having a spiritual experience as we are spirits having a human experience. We are trying to help our people understand that and walk their paths as the creator intended.
I just want to say thank you to Kevin and Matt and all of you in attendance today. I think we have some time for questions. My contact information is at the bottom as well. If anyone has follow-up questions or resources they would like that were discussed at today's presentation, I'll just leave that up for a minute so people can take that down.